If you hang around the online fighting game sphere long enough, firstly, I'm sorry, and secondly, you might hear people theorycraft what a potential Virtua Fighter crossover game would look like. Would it be a full collaboration with Dead or Alive, or Tekken, or maybe even the best fighting game ever made, Clay Fighter? Sega, in their infinite wisdom, already took care of this over 20 years ago, however. Released at home on the Sega Saturn, Fighters Megamix is a giant crossover title featuring many of their IPs, so if you've ever wanted to see Akira square up with Barn from Fighting Vipers, this is the game for you. I've known about Fighters Megamix for a long time, but I've never actually played it, so I want to experience the game for the first time and cover it in video format. Interestingly, Fighters Megamix has been in the video game news cycle recently due to one of the game's developers, Yutaka Ito, revealing that he hit a hidden stage in the game that was never revealed publicly by Sega due to the game crashing if you punch the enemy through a wall. This bug was caught after Sega had already shipped thousands of copies of the game to market, so it was impossible to remove. Okay, with the contractually obligated intro completed, let's explore Fighters Megamix in detail. I normally cover a game's development cycle in my videos, but in the case of Fighters Megamix, I wasn't able to find much information. In Yutaka Ito's post about the game's hidden stage, he mentions that Fighters Megamix was developed under a very tight deadline, but there were no further quotes, images, or developer interviews I could consult for more information regarding this deadline. I also found an article detailing some of the game's cut content, as unused characters are mentioned in the files, including Street Fighters Ryu and Ken, believe it or not. This was most likely a joke that was inserted into the game by a developer during testing, but it would have been cool to see some of Sega's characters that are mentioned here make it into the final game. While I want nothing more in life than to find out more development information about Fighters Megamix, I think it's best if we move on to the gameplay for now. There are 5 commands here, and you can freely remap your controls, which is really nice. There's punch, kick, block, grab, and evade. By default, sidesteps are mapped to the triggers on the controller, and you press down and a trigger to step to the foreground. This isn't as immediately intuitive as something like sidestepping in Tekken or Virtua Fighter, but it didn't take long before I got used to the system, thankfully. The other buttons are self-explanatory, and you can perform special moves and combos with them. Many characters have ways to launch the opponent into the air and then follow up with a strike, and these kinds of combos are a big part of the game. If your opponent whiffs a big button, you can punish them with a launcher and make them regret showing up to the fight in the first place. Speaking generally now, as I personally am horrible at 3D fighting games, I found the gameplay of Fighters Megamix to be a little clunky at times. Some attacks in the game don't have a lot of range and they feel quite stubby, and trying to figure out certain combos and defensive techniques via experimentation in training mode didn't come naturally to me, but I'm pretty sure that this is due to my lack of experience with the game. If you're a new player like me, I recommend reading through an online guide or a character move list to grasp the different kind of attacks in the game. Each character has plenty of moves, seriously, there are a lot of them, and they're all used at different ranges, so it's up to you to figure out which character works best at the range you like to play. For example, Wolf is a good pick for grappler fans as he's all about close range pressure and damaging command grabs, whereas someone like Piki can be used in the mid-range as he can poke with a skateboard. In typical 3D fighting game fashion, having a balance between highs, mids, lows, and throws in your game plan is crucial, as becoming predictable can lead to you eating a fat counter hit. Defensively, you can also duck to avoid throws and highs, and you can also sidestep in either direction to avoid linear moves. This is all pretty standard 3D fighting game stuff, so I won't get into it in too much detail, but I will say that cleanly avoiding an opponent's strike always feels really satisfying. There are also a lot of characters here, and the game's character roster is honestly my favorite part of the whole game. You have the usual suspects like the Virtua Fighter and the Fighting Vipers crew, but there are also characters who are infamous for being super weird. I don't know if you guys ever played the cult classic Daytona USA before, but the Hornet race car from that game is a playable fighter here. Yes, this is real, and handling the car feels as weird as it looks. It's still awesome though. In addition to the Hornet, Fighters Megamix also has some other weird inclusions, including, but not limited to, Child Akira from Virtua Fighter Kids, this massive bear creature who reminds me of Kumamon, Rent-A-Hero from the Japanese exclusive game of the same name, Amingo's long-lost cactus brother from Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and perhaps my favorite fighting game character of all time, the Sega AM2 palm tree. Sega looked at AM2's logo and thought, yeah, let's put the tree in the game. No matter how unique you think your favorite fighting game is, I guarantee that it doesn't let you play as a sentient palm tree. So this game is an immediate 10 out of 10 in my books. Jokes aside, the wacky nature of the game's character roster is its greatest asset, and it's clear to see that the development team weren't afraid of including bizarre characters and features if it meant the player would have a lot of fun with it. Seeing animations as broken and just head-scratchingly confusing as these in an actual fighting game that was legitimately shipped to market is simply brilliant, and it means that a lot of Fighters Megamix's unique charm comes from its humor. I can't say that I've played many fighting games before that are this funny, and I'm not sure if this is intentional or if the development team somehow created comedy gold by accident. Aside from the humorous aspects of Fighters Megamix, I genuinely think that this is one of the most diverse rosters I've ever seen in any fighting game. Every character is so unique with their visual designs and their fighting styles, and it's obvious that Sega put a lot of effort in when it came to differentiating the characters' gameplay strategies. There's a type of character for everyone in the game, and it helps Fighters Megamix appeal to a wide audience, which I love. I had so much fun dicking around in training mode with all the characters to see which ones I enjoyed the most. And even something as simple as seeing Akira fighting Ban in an official capacity is so cool! One of the game's best qualities is that you can make so many potential dream matchups come true, especially with the more obscure characters. You can have a joke character battle, a confrontation with a polar bear and a glam rock star, and even Seba versus Janet is possible. Seba was a cut character who, despite being advertised for the first Virtua Fighter on some arcade cabinets, never actually made his way into the final game, and Janet is from Virtua Cop 2, which isn't even a fighting game. The way that I see it is that the familiar game mechanics of Fighters Megamix guaranteed that the casual Sega fighting game crowd back in the day would automatically check the game out, but the sheer amount of unknown and just downright strange character inclusions meant that the die-hard Sega radicals who would curb stomp Nintendo kids on the playground would have a brand new opportunity to interact with their favorite weirdo characters, and I can't even put into words how genius I think this is. Ever since I was a little kid, I've always been a big fan of games that are super quirky and bizarre, and this unhealthy obsession has led me to make 3 AM purchases that I definitely don't regret. Seriously though, these games are awesome, so I respect the hell out of Fighters Megamix for just throwing stuff at the wall and not being afraid to include characters who are the furthest thing from mainstream. It's really awesome. Now that we've analysed the character roster for a bit, let's look at the other content that Fighters Megamix has to offer. As this game was released during a time when online play for fighting games wasn't really a thing, the developers went all in on single-player content to keep users occupied. First off, we have the arcade mode of the game. This is a linear series of fights against predetermined opponents, and they come in various themes. You can choose any character you want to tackle this mode, and completing these modes grants you with rewards, like new characters for example. Most of the characters in the game are unlocked this way, so I hope you like grinding for content. For transparency's sake, I'm using a 100% completed save file I found online to have immediate access to all the game's content, because some of this stuff takes forever to unlock. The AM2 Palm Tree character, for example, requires you to play the game for 84 hours before he becomes unlocked, and even then, he's hidden on the character select screen and he requires a special selection method. Even though I'm really liking this game so far, I simply don't have the time to unlock everything legitimately, and I salute those who did it this way back in the day. I don't know if this is just because I'm bad at the game, but it felt like the courses got harder as I progressed, and I don't mind this, as it provides the player with challenges that steadily increase over time. Oh yeah, before I forget, if you look in the game settings menu, you can find a toggle between Virtua Fighter and Fighters Megamix mode. I had no idea what this meant at first, and while there's no clear, definitive answer online due to the game's age and relative obscurity, I believe this mode toggles between the fighting styles of these two titles. If you aren't aware, Fighting Vipers incorporates battle damage and stage destruction into its gameplay. An excellent write-up on the game on the VFDC website explains that if you enable this mode, you can stop Virtua Fighter's resident alcoholic Shundi from taking drinks by destroying his bottles. These drinks are a really crucial part of his game plan, and being able to just totally disable them is a super cool detail. You'd never notice stuff like this on a surface level, but it means that if you like to dive deep into fighting games and find obscure tech, you're gonna find plenty of stuff in Fighters Megamix. Okay, tangents aside, this game also has a survival mode. You fight a bunch of opponents until you run out of health, and while it's nothing super original, it's a nice mode to have. Team battles also make an appearance, and I've always loved this feature in games like Tekken, so I also really appreciate it here too. Being able to make a team of the most silly characters in the game and just go ham will never get old, and it means that Fighters Megamix is the only game in existence where you can partner the Hornet car with Child Sarah. There's also the ability to play against another person, which is obviously a standard fighting game feature, and the final mode in the game is Training Mode. As far as I can tell, there's no way to change the training dummy's settings, but aside from that, this mode isn't too bad. Figuring out which moves and combos work in certain situations is key to winning a match, but it's also pretty fun to just mindlessly beat up the dummy. Those are all the modes in the game, but there are some extra options thankfully. You can make it so that one or even both of the fighters in a match are completely invincible, which I assume would help you out in getting big records in survival mode. Fighting Viper's Hyper Mode also shows up in Fighters Megamix, and this makes moves recover faster than normal, as well as giving you access to combos that normally don't exist. Although the game is already pretty crazy, this dials it up to 11, and Hyper Mode is really fun. Moving on from modes now, there are also a good amount of stages too. They each have unique lighting and different themes, helping them all to stand apart and feel unique. Both the flat stages from Virtua Fighter and walled stages from Fighting Vipers make appearances, and these can have a major impact on your gameplay. If there are no walls, you never have to worry about being cornered, and this also means that wall combos just don't exist on these stages. It's the direct opposite for the Fighting Viper stages, however, so your goal here is to get the opponents back to the wall and pummel them into submission. Looking at the game's content as a whole now, you're gonna get out of the game what you put in. If you play Fighters Megamix every now and then, you don't put much time into it, then there's not going to be that many characters or hidden settings for you to mess around with. But if you go hard and try to live, breathe, sweat, and bleed Fighters Megamix, then you're going to find a lot of things to get lost in. Unlocking new characters by clearing single-player content is as old school as it gets, and it's pretty nice playing a fighting game where half the roster isn't DLC. I also can't imagine running a tournament for this game without all the characters being unlocked, because I guarantee you that there would be one entrant in the tournament who would insist on using the palm tree, forcing the TO to leave the console on for days to unlock the joke character. How do I know this? Well, that person was me. In all seriousness, while the modes found in Fighters Megamix aren't that unique, the characters and secret settings are, so there's plenty of reason for you to sit your butt down and unlock them all. One thing that I love about old fighting games is that their content has very mysterious qualities and you're never quite sure how to unlock everything. Fighters Megamix perfectly fits this description, and playing it nowadays to unlock its characters is oddly nostalgic. Being rewarded with something brand new every time you complete one of the courses creates a positive feedback loop that can keep players hooked, but it doesn't feel malicious here. A lot of modern games use this method to sell you microtransactions and loot boxes and things like that, but the development team at Sega wanted you to beat up a Japanese child as a grizzly bear. By this point in the video, we can easily tell that Fighters Megamix is essentially an Adderall overdose. But did people like it? Was the game well received when it came out? Did the game solve any wars? Yes, yes, and surprisingly yes are the answers, dear viewer. Fighters Megamix has an 88% on game rankings, indicating that the average review score for the game was an 8.8 out of 10. Over in its native Japan, famous game magazine Famitsu gave the game a 35 out of 40, which is super high. I wasn't able to find other Japanese reviews for the game, but I'm going to assume that Japanese Sega fans also loved the game. Over in the West, Fighters Megamix was also critically acclaimed. Computer and Video Games magazine provided the game with perfect scores, and it even received a 9.25 out of 10 from Game Informer. The magazine's reviewers loved the game's character roster and gameplay, and it turns out that this is the highest score that they ever gave a Saturn game in their entire publication history. After reading through various reviews for the game, I noticed some trends that they all shared. For starters, the game's amazing replay value and inclusion of brand new moves for the Virtua Fighter characters were universally appreciated by reviewers, and they thought that these qualities helped Fighters Megamix to stand apart from other Sega fighting games released around the same time. The game's insane nature was praised too, and although fighters like Hornet, the AM2 Palm Tree, and the literal slab of meat aren't meant to be taken seriously, they're really fun, so at the end of the day, who really cares if these characters aren't super competitively viable? Being able to see the characters from Fighting Vipers and Virtua Fighter battle it out with a bunch of fun and silly guest characters in the back was the game's biggest selling point, and this was also beloved by critics who were fans of one or maybe even both of these games. However, it wasn't all perfect, as there were some common gripes with the game that I noticed when reading the reviews. The game's graphics were criticized, not heavily mind you, but they were still written off as being generally inferior to something like Virtua Fighter 2. Fighters Megamix runs at a lower resolution, and its character models have fewer polygons than the ones in VF2, so I understand why these reviewers had these criticisms. Another source of contention stems from the difficulty of the single-player courses. While I personally found them to be a challenge because I suck, American reviewers thought that these modes were simply too easy, and that they failed to provide any intense battles with tricky enemy AI. However, on pages 60 to 61 of Sega Saturn magazine's 20th issue, we can find a piece on the game where the author states that the difficulty was increased in PAL copies of the game, so maybe the PAL versions of Fighters Megamix specifically have stronger enemy AI? Look, I'm really not sure, but if it's true, it's a really interesting difference. My research for this video also revealed that the game sold a whopping 600,000 copies in Japan alone. I didn't even know that 600,000 people bought Sega Saturns, let alone a weirdo fighting game that was a system exclusive. It goes without saying, but this is an amazing sales figure, and I assume that Sega would have made back the money that they spent on the game. By doing some math and by using inflation calculators, I estimate that Sega made roughly $1 kajillion. Sales were also pretty good in the West, too. GamePro magazine reveals that from June to August 1997, Fighters Megamix was the top Sega Saturn video game rental. And as a side note, I miss when you could rent games. Okay, so the game sold and reviewed super well in both Japan and the West, but did Fighters Megamix leave any sort of lasting impression? Sort of. Sega never made a sequel to the game, and although it features characters from games like Sonic the Fighters, Virtua Cop, and Daytona USA, none of these games are around anymore, unless you count the most recent Daytona USA game from 2016, but I don't know, I didn't think it was very good. Fighting Vipers is also one of the big dogs of Fighters Megamix, and this series also faded into obscurity, unfortunately. By the way, I have more Fighting Vipers information in this video, go watch it, thank you. Virtua Fighter also kind of went on hiatus throughout most of the 2010s, although the most recent Game Awards in 2024, as of recording this video, showed us all that a brand new game in the series is in development, thank God. Other than that, however, there's really not much in the way of a legacy for this game, which is super unfortunate. I'm sure many people still know about this game vaguely from its wacky character roster, and when I've brought the game up at my fighting game locals, people often say, oh yeah, Fighters Megamix, that's the game with the car, right? The character roster in this game feels like Sega threw darts at characters on a dartboard, and the pictures that got pierced made it into the game, which is an amazing way to design a character roster, I might add. It's a shame, because fighting games this wacky and bizarre aren't being made by the big studios anymore, including Sega. I'm not sure if there's any room on the market for a game like Fighters Megamix nowadays, to be honest, and because Sega Saturn emulation is harder than making it through one of my old videos, I don't think Sega would ever port this game to modern systems, unfortunately. A lot of modern fighting games do have wacky content, from Kuma having Electric Wing Godfist in Tekken, Zangief's perfect win animation in Street Fighter 6, and whatever the hell this outfit is in KOF. But I don't think any of it comes close to the sheer lunacy that is Fighters Megamix. This game is still very unique, even after all this time has passed, and it means that a lot of fighting game fans in the present day will have plenty of fun with the game. I know I did, and even though I play Fighters Megamix like a defective AI robot, its presentation, character roster, and overall insane vibe instantly caught my attention. Overall, Fighters Megamix is a pretty fun game, especially if you're the type of person who enjoys wacky woohoo fun mega time in your fighting games. It's a shame that the game never received a sequel for a system like the Dreamcast, and a follow-up could have used assets from Virtua Fighter 3 and Fighting Vipers 2 to create a better looking and feeling game, but I digress. Getting this game to work on an emulator wasn't too hard for me to do, and despite there being some minor frame rates and graphical issues every now and then, it's still very fun via emulation, so I highly recommend Fighters Megamix, especially if you can play the game with some friends. There aren't many games that let you beat up a palm tree, and this game will always live rent-free in my head as a result. I really can't get enough of this. Anyway, you get the point by now, so thank you very much for watching, I hope you had a good time, and I'll see you in the next one.